Hey everybody, Indiana Magnum again. So what I've got here today, I thought I'd talk about because I think these are kind of cool. This is my collection of Smith & Wesson Victory Model revolvers. Now basically what they are is they're a Smith & Wesson Model 10. They were made for issue during World War II. I won't go into the history of the Model 10 and all that stuff. I'm just going to talk about the Victory models themselves. I think they're really cool because it's a real piece of history. They're not really that well known. I mean, gun people know about them, but you know, unlike a lot of guns, you know, the Colt 45 and the Luger, and you know, a lot of people that don't know much about guns can name a few famous guns, but they're probably not going to name the Smith & Wesson, you know, Model 10 or the Smith & Wesson Victory model. They were a workaday gun, not particularly glamorous, not famous. They just got the job done. They made, I think, almost 600,000 of the Victory model guns in various different configurations. You know, and they were just made, they were issued, they were used, and you know, they kind of faded from history after that. So let me see, what do I want to tell you? So basically, again, they're a Model 10. Here's a Smith & Wesson Model 10. Now this one was made probably around 1970. That would be my guess. Maybe a little later, sometime in the 70s. I've never really tried to, you know, pin it down, research it exactly when it was made. Well, one other thing I guess I should mention is, although I call these Model 10s, and I've been, I think, referring to them as Model 10s, that's a relatively new designation. I think Smith & Wesson started doing that in the 1960s. I think about 1967, somewhere in there. They switched the model number around. Previous to that, I believe they were called the Smith & Wesson 38 Hand Ejector Model 1899, or the Model 1899 Military and Police. I suspect they did that simply, you know, by the late 1960s, it didn't sound, you know, as far as marketing goes, it probably sounded a little funny to try to sell guns that were called the Model 1899. You know, it's pretty old technology, so, you know, call it something different, make people think it's, you know, up to date. Now, there were changes. This one made in the 1970s is not exactly the same as an original Model 1899. There's some internal differences, and the sight is different. You know, there are differences, but basically for the, you know, for the non-gun enthusiast who isn't too interested in detail, this is basically the same as a Model 1899. But that's a Smith & Wesson Model 10, civilian issue. Nothing too remarkable. Good workaday gun though. I mean, they reliable, accurate, you know, great gun. But anyway, during World War II, Smith & Wesson made a lot of these for, you know, America's allies. They were used by Canada and England, and I think some of the other Commonwealth countries, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, they all used them. Sometimes they bought them outright. I have one here like that. This is an early, what you would probably call a Victory model, and this was purchased by the Canadian government outright, right from Smith & Wesson. You can tell it's an early one because of the barrel length. Most of them have a shorter barrel, more common. You can see that a little bit shorter there. Yeah, this is the 6-inch barrel. It's a 5-inch barrel. Most of them had 5-inch barrels. You can also tell it's an early one because of the bluing and the finish. I'll try to get it in the light. And this one's, you know, seen a lot of wear and tear over the years. There's not a lot of finish left on it, but you can see it was finished like a civilian gun. You know, it had it was smooth. All the machining marks were taken out, and the bluing was, you know, done to a reasonably high standard. It does have just the plain military style grips on it. Now you could say, well, how do I know it's a military gun and not just a civilian gun? Basically, if you look right here, there's the Canadian stamp on there. It's a combination of the British arrow mark. Most British military equipment is marked with that arrow that you can see in the center, and then if it's Canadian, they put a big C around it. So, you know, I know this was Canadian government property at one time. And of course, you can also tell it's not a normal American one because it's chambered in 38 Smith & Wesson, not 38 Special. The Americans, the civilian ones, and the ones the Americans used in their military, again, 38 Special, or 38 Smith & Wesson Special. But these ones were chambered for the British service cartridge, the 38 Smith & Wesson. It's basically the same caliber, pretty close, but the 38 Special is quite a bit longer. You can see there's a 38 Smith & Wesson and there's a 38 Special. So basically same diameter, but 38 Special is a bit longer. It's got a bit more powder in there, and therefore it's got a little bit more power. In my opinion, the 38 Special is a much better round. But the old 38 Smith & Wesson gets the job done. So anyway, there's an early one. Like I said, it's got the longer 6-inch barrel. It's got the nicer blued finish. The machining marks are taken off, but it does have the plain grips, and it has the Canadian Army proof stamp. You can also, I should say, it's also, you can tell it falls into what we call a victory model, but it isn't quite, because it doesn't have the V in the serial number. Most victory models have the letter V stamped in front of the serial number. I can show you that on another one right here. Yeah. This one has the letter V in front of the serial number. So, you know, true victory model. So anyway, that's the early one, like I said. Then we have another fairly early one, although it does have the shorter barrel, 5-inch barrel. It is also not stamped with a V, but it does have, it's hard to see on here, but it does have the Canadian proof marks on it, and it is also finished originally to a fairly high standard. It had good bluing, and most of the machining marks were taken out of it, but you can start to see a few machining marks here and there that you can't see on the earlier one. So you can kind of tell that, you know, okay, the war's progressing, we need more of these guns, let's stop polishing them quite so much and get them out the door, you know, get them out of here. So, you know, they were moving them along. But this is a pretty good example. It's got some holster wear and some pitting on the cylinder, you know, being stored in a damp holster or something probably. But not a bad one. So then moving along. So here's a true victory model. It's got the V in front of the serial number. It's got some military proofs on it. But the finish has completely changed. This one, you can really see, I don't know how good you guys will be able to see it in the light, but if I turn it just right, you can really see the machining marks. because the pressure was on even more to get these out the door. You know, let's not worry about fit and, you know, they're the finish. We'll just get them out the door. And they're also not blued anymore. It's a different kind of finish on it. Again, these are all 38 Smith & Wessons, so they're intended for, you know, Britain or the Commonwealth. But this one is stamped United States property on it. So that tells us that it's a true victory model, and it was probably intended under the Lend-Lease agreement. Now, I won't go into the history of the Lend-Lease agreement, but basically it was sort of, they were lending these guns to the British or the Canadians, whatever, leasing them, but there was kind of the intention that they were still sort of American property, and America should get them back at the end of the war. The reality is, by the end of the war, the United States didn't really want any of them back. It would have cost more to ship them back and store them than it was worth. So basically, they just stayed in England or Canada or wherever they ended up, and those countries dealt with them however they wanted to. But again, kind of cool, United States property, but never made. You know, there was no intention of it ever actually being used by American forces. It's chambered in 38 Smith & Wesson. It's not chambered for the American 38 Special. This one's a pretty cool little example. The only thing wrong with this one is it's missing the lanyard ring. Someone's lost that. You could find a new one. Find an old junker and take the lanyard ring off and put it on this one. After the war, this one was issued. This one went to a police department. It's got police department markings on it. So somehow ended up in law enforcement. So, okay, what else we got here? Well, here's another one. This is an example of what happened after the war. After the war, these guns were a dime a dozen, basically. A lot of soldiers brought them back, of course, and governments sold them off, because they didn't want them anymore. They were pretty much obsolete. Now, we know this is a victory model. You might think, well, that's a civilian gun. It doesn't look like a victory model, but we know it's a victory model because it's got the V stamped in front of the serial number. So what's happened after the war? Oh, and you can also tell, if you look underneath this bluing, you can still see machining marks under there. Because what happened after the war, somebody took this gun. Now, it could have been done just by an individual, or it could have been done by a company, who knows, but they took one of these victory models and they spruced it up. They nickel-plated the trigger and the hammer. They re-blued it with a really thick coat of bluing. I don't like that. It looks kind of horrible. It's almost like it's painted on there, but it's not. It's just a big thick coating of bluing. They civilianized the front sight. They gave it sort of a more civilian Model 10 sight, if you compare them. They did the same thing on that. The real victory model, when this gun was made, it would have had rounded sight like that. So they messed up the front sight, they re-blued it, they nickel-plated the hammer and the trigger, and they also put these really, as far as I'm concerned, ugly grips on there. I think those grips are horrible. They're some kind of burled wood, I don't know, walnut or something, but it's ugly. But anyway, that's what they did. Oh, and they took the lanyard ring off. You can see there was a lanyard ring. I don't know if you can see it, but there's the plug. They took it off and they plugged the hole. So basically they destroyed any collector value, but after the war there was no collector value. There were millions, or well, hundreds of thousands of these guns kicking around. So either some company or some individual decided to spruce it up. But it's an example of what, the history of these particular firearms, what happened to them. So, my last one here, and this is kind of neat. Little short barrel. But as cool as that short barrel is, it's not supposed to have a short barrel. At first I thought it was, when I first seen it, I thought, oh, it's one with a short barrel. That's really cool. But on closer inspection, the barrel's simply been hacked off by somebody. You can tell that a couple of different ways. Number one is the sight is not integral to the barrel. If you look at the proper ones, the sight is part of the barrel. It's not a separate piece. It's made, it's part of the barrel. On this one it isn't. It's been cut off and it's been soldered or brazed or somehow stuck back on. The other thing is the muzzle crown is not proper. If you examine it, you won't be able to see on here, but if you examine it really closely, you can see it's not crowned like any of these other ones. It's, it's a bit of a hack job. Somebody did not a bad job. They didn't just cut it with a hacksaw and leave it. They cut it and they tried their best to trim it properly, but it's not done right. And another dead giveaway, of course, is that some of the stamps, the proof mark or the words here, my mind has gone blank as to the data stamp, I guess you'd call it. It's underneath the sight. You can't read it all because it's hidden underneath the front sight. So you know that, okay, that's a hack job after the war. And the other thing, of course, is it has the original grip on one side, but on the other side, they've put this cheesy plastic thing on there, which I guess is sort of so you can stick it in your pants pocket. So basically, someone didn't like the big long gun. They wanted to make it into something that was a little more handy, a little more, concealable kind of thing. Who knows who did that? Could have been anybody from a policeman to, a civilian. But since this gun's in Canada, this is a Canadian, issued gun, and we don't carry guns in Canada. There's a good chance it was done for law enforcement. The 1950s or 60s, some policeman might have been using this. Again, it's got U.S. property stamped on the top, so we know it's a Lend-Lease. It's got heavy machine marks. It's not properly blued. And it has the victory, or the V, in the serial number. So we know it is an original victory that's just been modified. So that really kind of kills a lot of the collector value, of course, but it's still kind of cool. I like to see what people do with guns. I'm always reluctant to modify guns, so you buy them from other people who have already done the dirty deed. Anyway, that's the history lesson of these victory models. Now you can get more into it. There's a lot of little different proof marks and things you can look for. I'm not going to go into that today. You can look for ones that went to Australia, and you look for ones that went to South Africa or whatever. But here in Canada, these are the ones that pretty much turn up the most, are the ones that went to our soldiers during World War II. Anyway, that's the Smith & Wesson Victory model, also known as the Model 10. Kind of an overlooked gun, but a really good gun, a really cool gun, I think. And that's all I got on that, I guess, for today. Oh, I guess I wasn't done. One more thing. Why, did the British and the Canadians and everybody else need these victory models? What was going on there? Well, simply, the British at that time, they were using these break-top Enfield revolvers. This is I call it the commando style because it doesn't have a hammer, but they also made them with a hammer too. Well, it has a hammer, but it's bobbed, so you can't actually get it. You have to shoot this firearm double action. You can't shoot it single action. Anyway, they were making these guns at the beginning of the war. This was basically a copy, a scaled down sort of copy of the original Webley revolver. and they were making these, and everybody got caught with their pants down at the beginning of the war, and we didn't have enough. They couldn't produce. They tried to ramp up production, but there was just no way. So they went to Webley, and Webley in some ways copied this, but of course this was a copy of a earlier Webley, so you know, what comes around goes around. But basically Webley started producing their version, as many of them as they could. This is an actual war finish one. It says right on here war finish, so you know it was made during the war. Because like the Victory models I talked about earlier, you can see all the machining marks in the war finish ones. They were trying to get them out the door as fast as they could. But even though they had Enfield producing these and Webley producing these, they couldn't make them fast enough. They couldn't do it. So they started scrambling, looking around, and you know, America to the rescue, I suppose. Smith & Wesson was able to produce, well, like I said, almost 600,000 of these. So they bought these. And it's interesting, or they borrowed them, depending on the situation. But anyway, it's interesting to note that a lot of service personnel preferred these Smith & Wessons over their Enfields and Webleys. Now, there's nothing wrong with the Enfields and Webleys. They were good guns. But technically, they were obsolete. Break-top revolvers had been obsolete since the late 1890s. You know, this swing-out cylinder design, it's a little stronger design. You know, it's got a solid frame. These ones don't. They got, you know, a break-top frame with a hinge in there. That's a weaker design inherently. And these ones are generally a little easier to use. You shoot your 6 shots, push the button, you open it up, you push that ejector, shells all fall out, you reload, you close it, you're ready to go. These ones, a little bit slower for the most part. Gotta push down, break it, the shells fall away. Sometimes they don't fall away, sometimes they fall back inside the cylinder, or worst case scenario, if you don't tip the gun over when you do that, what happens is the empty shells will fall down and go underneath the ejector, and once that happens, you're out of the fight. They're stuck under there, and then you gotta fiddle around and try to get them out. That doesn't tend to happen with these ones. So all in all, this is a better gun. Not that like I said, not that there's anything wrong with these. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that little bit on the end of the video. And for this time, this time I really mean it. That's it. We'll talk at you later. Indiana Magnum, signing off.